The boxing hall was alive with noise. People cheered, some shouted, and others stamped their feet on the wooden floor. The smell of sweat, leather, and strong energy filled the air. Posters of strong men and women were hanging on the walls, showing champions from different years. Everyone had gathered for tonight's match, but most eyes were on one man, Marco. Marco was known for his pride. He had won many fights and loved the attention. His tall body, quick hands, and sharp eyes gave him an edge in the ring. But it was not only his strength that made him famous. His words, too, spread fast. He often spoke with confidence that sounded close to arrogance. People either admired him or disliked him. Tonight, Marco's voice had already stirred the crowd. Earlier in the evening, he had laughed when he saw his opponent warming up. Across the hall stood Alina, a young woman with strong arms and calm eyes. Her skin glowed with a deep shade of brown, her black hair tied neatly back. She wore simple boxing shorts and a plain white top, nothing fancy, but there was quiet determination in the way she moved her hands, stretching and warming up. Marco smirked. "She's no match for me," he told the reporters. "This will be quick." The reporters caught his words and spread them among the crowd. Some laughed with him. Others stayed quiet, waiting to see what would really happen. Alina heard the words too. She did not respond. She simply wrapped her hands carefully, her face calm. Inside, she remembered all the months of training. Early mornings, long runs, heavy bags, sweat dripping down her back, and the voice of her coach pushing her forward. She had worked too hard to let arrogance break her spirit tonight. The announcer's voice boomed across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's match will show strength, skill, and courage. On my left, the crowd's favorite Marco, the Iron Fist. And on my right, making her big appearance tonight, Alina, the rising star." The audience cheered, though many voices leaned toward Marco. He raised his gloved hands high, grinning, feeding on the noise. Alina only nodded once, her eyes steady, her hands held close to her chest. The bell rang. Marco moved quickly, his steps light, his arms loose. He tested the space, throwing a few quick punches in the air, smiling at the crowd. Alina kept her guard up, her eyes never leaving him. "Come on," Marco said, almost joking. "Show me what you've got." But Alina didn't rush. She circled carefully, studying him. The crowd grew restless. They wanted action. They shouted Marco's name, cheering for him to end it quickly. Marco, full of confidence, stepped in fast and threw a sharp jab. Alina blocked it. He threw another, faster, but again she blocked. Marco blinked, surprised. She was calm, her defense strong. Minutes passed, and sweat began to form on Marco's forehead. He had expected an easy match, but Alina's eyes never looked afraid. Every punch he threw, she seemed to see it coming. Her steps were quick, her movements smart. The bell rang again, end of the first round. The crowd clapped, but some were murmuring. It was not the easy show they had expected. Marco went to his corner, breathing harder than he thought he would. His coach whispered, "Don't underestimate her. She's sharper than you think." Across the ring, Alina sat quietly. Her coach gave her water and said softly, "Keep calm. Remember your training." Don't let his words shake you. Fight with your heart, not for their cheers. Alina nodded. Inside, she felt a fire. She knew many people in the hall doubted her. She knew Marco saw her as less. But she also knew her strength was not just in her fists. It was in her spirit. When the second round began, the noise in the hall grew louder. Marco came in strong, throwing punches with more force now. Alina blocked again, but this time she answered with a quick jab of her own. The glove touched Marco's cheek, light but clear. The crowd gasped. Marco frowned. He had not expected that. Alina didn't smile, didn't show pride. She just kept her guard up, her focus sharp. The fight had only begun, but the crowd could already feel it. This was not going to be the simple show Marco had promised. Something unexpected was building in the ring. And though Marco stood tall and strong, a quiet truth was slowly entering his mind. Alina was not here to play his game. She was here to show her strength. The bell rang once more, but this time the hall was silent for a moment before cheers broke out, not just for Marco, but for Alina too. It was no longer just his story. It was becoming hers. The air inside the boxing hall was heavier now. The crowd's voices had changed from laughter to surprise. Some people whispered to each other, wondering if they had judged too soon. Marco, standing tall in his corner, rubbed his face with his glove. That small jab from Alina in the second round had not hurt him, but it had touched something deeper than his skin. It had touched his pride. She got lucky, Marco told himself. But in his heart, a small seed of doubt had already been planted. The third round began. Marco came forward quickly, his steps sharp, his fists moving faster than before. He wanted to end the match, to show everyone that he was still the stronger fighter. His punches came heavy, striking Alina's gloves with force. The sound of leather against leather echoed through the hall. But Alina stayed calm. She stepped back when she needed, leaned aside when his punches came close, and used her feet with surprising balance. Every move showed her hours of practice, every dodge carried her quiet strength. The crowd leaned forward in their seats. They had come expecting Marco's easy victory, but now they were watching something different, a battle of patience, focus, and hidden power. Marco finally landed a strong punch to Alina's shoulder. The crowd cheered, and Marco raised his arm for a moment, smiling as if he had already won. But Alina did not fall. She shook her arms, steadied her breath, and stepped closer again. Her eyes were still clear, her guard still strong. Why won't she break? Marco thought, his heart beating faster than usual. Then it happened. Alina moved quickly, slipping past Marco's long arm and striking him with a sharp jab to the side. The crowd gasped again. This time, it was not luck. It was skill. Marco stepped back, blinking. For the first time in many matches, his smile faded. The bell rang. End of round 3. Both fighters went to their corners. Marco sat down heavily, sweat rolling down his face. His coach leaned in. Marco, listen to me. You're not focused. You think this is about pride, but it's not. She's not afraid of you. If you keep fighting with arrogance, you'll lose. Use your mind, not just your fists. Marco shook his head. She's good, but I'm better, he muttered. Yet his voice did not sound as strong as before. Across the ring, Alina sat quietly as her coach spoke to her. You're doing well. Don't let the noise distract you. He is fast, but you are steady. Remember why you're here. You're not fighting just him. You're fighting the doubt of everyone who said you couldn't. Alina closed her eyes for a second, remembering. She remembered the voices from her past, people telling her boxing was not for her, people laughing when she first put on the gloves. She remembered the long runs at dawn when the streets were empty, the ache in her arms after training, the moments when quitting seemed easier. And she remembered how she always stood back up. When the bell rang for round 4, she opened her eyes with quiet fire. This time, the fight changed. Marco charged again, but his punches grew wilder. He wanted to prove himself quickly. Alina, instead of only blocking, began to answer. Her fists moved with rhythm, not as heavy as Marco's, but precise. She struck his side, then stepped back. She jabbed at his chest, then slipped away. Each punch told Marco something he had never wanted to hear, that she was not a weak opponent. The crowd roared, some shouting Marco's name, others now calling out for Alina. For the first time, the hall was divided. Marco's chest rose and fell faster. Sweat dripped into his eyes. He swung hard, but missed. His fist hit the air, leaving him open for a moment. Alina took that chance. A quick left, light but sharp, touched his chin. The noise in the hall exploded. People stood from their seats. Marco stepped back, shocked. He had not been hit like that in a long time. His pride shook. But Alina's face showed no celebration. She did not raise her hands or smile. She simply returned to her stance, her eyes focused, her breathing steady. The bell rang again. End of the fourth round. Marco walked back to his corner, slower now. His mind was full of questions. Why can't I end this? Why is she still standing? He looked across the ring at Alina, who sat quietly, sipping water, her eyes still calm. For the first time in his career, Marco felt something new in his chest. It was not anger. It was not even fear. It was respect, though he would not admit it yet. The audience felt it too. They had not expected this. What started as a fight of pride was turning into something much more. It was no longer about showing weakness. It was about showing strength. And Alina, the woman many thought would not last a single round, was now holding the story in her hands. The hall was no longer the same as before. At the start of the night, almost everyone had believed Marco would win easily. They had laughed, cheered, and clapped for him. Now, the mood had shifted. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, as if they were afraid to blink and miss what was happening. Marco sat in his corner, his shoulders rising and falling as he tried to catch his breath. His coach placed a wet towel on his neck and whispered, "You can't just depend on your name, Marco. Every fighter has a day when pride is tested. Maybe this is yours." Marco closed his eyes. His chest burned with heat, but inside his heart something heavier stirred. He had always seen himself as the strongest, the champion who no one could question. But Alina was breaking that picture piece by piece. Across the ring, Alina was calm. Her coach patted her shoulder. "Stay steady. Don't fight with anger. Fight with focus. You're not here to beat him for the crowd. You're here to prove your strength to yourself." Alina nodded. She breathed deeply, blocking out the loud noise of the hall. For a moment, she thought of her mother's voice from years ago, "Courage is not in shouting. Courage is in standing strong when others expect you to fall." Those words had stayed with her through every hard day of training. Tonight, they felt alive inside her. The bell rang for round 5. The fighters stood up again. Marco came forward with strong steps, his fists raised high. His face no longer carried the easy smile from the beginning of the fight. It was now serious, his eyes locked on Alina. Alina moved lightly, her feet quick. Marco tried to corner her, throwing a heavy punch. She dodged, then replied with a short jab. He swung again, faster this time, and she blocked, her arms firm. The crowd shouted with every move, clapping and gasping as the two fighters exchanged blows. Sweat flew in the air, the sound of fists hitting gloves echoed again and again. For a moment, Marco's power pushed Alina back. His punches came harder, forcing her closer to the ropes. The audience roared, thinking the end might come. But Alina's eyes stayed sharp. She ducked under a wild swing, then turned and stepped free from the corner. Marco stumbled slightly, surprised at her escape. Alina struck quickly with 2 light punches, one to his side and one to his chest. The crowd shouted her name now. "Alina! Alina!" The sound filled the hall, mixing with Marco's name. Marco's chest tightened as he heard it. His pride hurt more than his body. He swung again, but his arm felt heavier now. His breathing grew louder, his steps slower. He was not used to being tested for this long. Alina, though tired, showed patience. She did not rush. She did not try to prove anything with anger. She simply followed her training step: guard, strike, breathe. Her body moved with discipline, her spirit holding her steady. By the end of round 5, both fighters were sweating, their arms tired, their breaths heavy. But the story of the match had changed. No one could say it was easy for Marco anymore. The bell rang, and they went back to their corners. Marco sat down, bending forward, trying to breathe. His coach touched his shoulder. "Marco, listen. You can't fight her pride with your pride. If you want to win, respect her skill. Only then will you find your rhythm." Marco lifted his head. Respect. The word felt heavy. He had entered this fight certain that she was nothing but a show. Yet here she was, standing strong round after round. For the first time, Marco wondered if maybe this fight was not about him showing power, but about him learning something new. Alina sat in her corner, her coach giving her water. Her arms trembled slightly with tiredness, but her eyes were steady. "You're showing them who you are," her coach said softly. "Don't think about winning or losing. Think about giving your best. That's what makes a true fighter." Alina nodded, her heart calm. The bell rang for round 6. Both fighters stood again, moving to the center of the ring. The audience was louder than ever, cheering for both names now. For the first time, Marco and Alina looked at each other with different eyes. Marco no longer saw just an opponent he wanted to defeat easily. He saw a fighter, someone who had earned his respect inside the ring. And Alina saw more than a man filled with arrogance. She saw a champion who, beneath his pride, was beginning to understand her strength. The fight continued, fists moving, feet stepping, sweat flying. Every second felt heavy, every moment alive with tension. But in the middle of the noise, one thing was clear: this was no longer a battle of humiliation. It was becoming a story of two fighters, both testing their limits, both learning something about themselves. And as the crowd watched, hearts pounding, they knew one truth: the match was no longer only about who would win. It was about what each fighter would become by the end of it. The bell echoed through the hall, calling the fighters back to the center. Sweat shone on both their faces under the bright lights. The crowd stood half out of their seats, clapping, shouting, their voices blending into one storm of sound. Marco wiped his forehead with his glove. His chest rose and fell quickly, but his eyes no longer carried the same arrogance. He had entered the match thinking of Alina as a weak opponent, but now he stood in front of her with a different feeling. Respect. Alina stepped forward, her guard raised, her breathing steady. She felt the ache in her arms and legs, but her heart stayed calm. She did not think of Marco's earlier words anymore. She thought only of the fight in front of her, the test of her training, the proof of her spirit. The 6th round began with fast movement. Marco attacked first, his fists moving with sharp speed. Alina blocked, shifted, then answered with her own strikes. The sound of gloves clashing filled the air like drum beats. Marco noticed something unusual in himself. He was no longer fighting to humiliate. He was fighting to keep up. Each of Alina's moves demanded his full attention. For the first time in years, he felt the thrill of a real challenge. The audience saw it too. Cheers rose not only for Marco but for Alina. Every time she landed a clean jab, voices called her name. Every time she slipped past his punch, hands clapped loudly. Marco's coach shouted from the corner, "Focus, Marco. This fight isn't about showing off. It's about proving you still have the heart of a fighter." Those words struck him harder than any punch. The heart of a fighter. He had almost forgotten. He had spent years chasing fame, smiling for cameras, hearing people cheer his name. He had loved the easy victories. But what about the true test, the kind of fight that pushed him to his limits? Tonight, Alina was giving him that test. Alina, meanwhile, kept her focus narrow. She heard the crowd but did not let it shake her. Her coach's words repeated in her mind, "You are not fighting for their cheers. You are fighting to show yourself who you are." Halfway through the 6th round, Marco threw a strong right hook. Alina ducked under it and answered with a sharp punch to his ribs. Marco grunted softly, surprised again, and the crowd gasped. Alina didn't pause. She moved back, guard up, eyes clear. Marco touched his side, breathing heavily. He stared at Alina, and for the first time during the fight, a small smile appeared, not one of arrogance, but of admiration. "You're good," he said quietly, though the crowd could not hear it. Alina did not answer. She simply nodded once, her eyes steady. The bell rang, ending the round. Both fighters returned to their corners. The noise in the hall was now mixed chants for Marco, cheers for Alina, clapping for both. The fight had become something greater than anyone expected. Marco sat down, leaning forward, sweat dripping from his hair. His coach spoke firmly, "This is no longer about pride. If you want to walk out of this match with your head high, you need to give everything. Not to crush her, but to respect her." Marco nodded slowly. Deep inside, something shifted. He realized that no matter the outcome, this fight would change him. Alina rested in her corner, sipping water. Her arms trembled with tiredness, but her heart was full of strength. Her coach smiled. "You've already done more than anyone expected. But remember, this is not over yet. Keep steady." The 7th round began, and the atmosphere in the hall grew electric. Marco and Alina touched gloves lightly before starting. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. The audience noticed it and cheered louder. It was no longer two enemies in the ring. It was two fighters showing respect. They moved again, trading blows. Marco's punches were strong, Alina's were sharp. Each hit drew gasps from the crowd. Sweat flew in the air, gloves struck hard, and both fighters dug deep into their energy. By now, Marco's legs felt heavier, his breath shorter. But his spirit burned brighter than before. He had rediscovered the joy of a true fight. Alina, though tired, fought with calm determination. Her mind repeated one thought again and again: "Don't stop. Don't give up." The audience clapped rhythmically now, their voices lifting both fighters. It was no longer about who would win or lose. It was about courage, endurance, and heart. As the round neared its end, Marco landed a heavy punch that touched Alina's shoulder. She staggered back a step, but instead of falling, she came forward again and struck his side with quick precision. The sound echoed, and the crowd exploded in cheers. The bell rang. End of the 7th round. Both fighters returned to their corners, breathing hard, their faces shining with sweat. The crowd stood, clapping for both of them. The energy in the hall was alive, powerful, filled with respect. For Marco, it was no longer about protecting his pride. For Alina, it was no longer about proving her worth to others. It was about two fighters, each showing their true heart in the ring. The boxing hall felt heavier with every round that passed. The lights shone down, catching the sweat on both fighters' faces, while the crowd clapped and shouted with voices that shook the walls. People were no longer sure who would win. What they knew for certain was that they were watching something rare: two fighters giving everything, not just in strength but in heart. Marco sat in his corner, chest heaving. His coach fanned him with a towel and spoke in a low but firm voice. "Marco, you've carried yourself like a champion for years, but tonight is teaching you something new. This fight isn't just about showing you're strong. It's about showing you can respect another fighter's courage. Marco nodded slowly, the truth sinking in. He had begun this match with laughter, but now his respect for Alina was real. He could feel it in the weight of his tired arms, in the burn of his lungs, in the way he looked at her across the ring. Alina sat quietly in her corner. Her coach handed her water and whispered, "You're still here, Alina. Every round you've stayed strong. Remember, it's not only about the victory. It's about showing them your spirit." Alina closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered the early days of training, the doubts, the voices telling her she would never stand in a ring like this. And yet here she was, fighting round after round against a man the whole town once believed unbeatable. She opened her eyes again, steady and calm. The bell rang for the 8th round. The fighters rose. The crowd stood with them, clapping and cheering. Some shouted Marco's name, others shouted Alina's. But most simply called for both, united in their respect for what they were seeing. Marco moved first. His fists were slower now, but still strong. He struck forward, trying to keep his rhythm. Alina blocked, then answered with sharp jabs. Sweat flew each time their gloves touched, the sound of leather hitting leather echoing through the hall. For a moment, Marco pushed her back with heavy punches. His strength was still there, but it carried weight. His steps were less light, his shoulders tight with exhaustion. Alina used her quick feet, circling him, finding small openings. She landed short strikes not heavy enough to drop him, but enough to show she was still full of energy and focus. The crowd shouted louder, each movement met with claps and gasps. Marco gritted his teeth. She's not slowing down, he thought. How is she still standing with so much fire? Then, as if answering his thought, Alina whispered to herself inside her mind, I didn't come this far to stop now. The round continued, the fighters moving like two storms colliding. Marco's power against Alina's precision, both fueled by the same unshakable will. By the end of the 8th round, both fighters staggered back to their corners. Their bodies were exhausted, but their eyes still carried determination. The crowd clapped endlessly, shouting not just names but words like respect and courage. The hall was no longer divided between Marco and Alina. It was united in admiration. Marco sat heavily, breathing like fire burned inside his chest. His coach leaned close. You see her, don't you? She's not just another fighter. She's teaching you something. If you fight only to protect pride, you'll lose more than a match. But if you fight with heart, you'll leave the ring as more than a champion. Marco listened, silent, his eyes on Alina. Alina rested, her coach smiling softly. You've done what many thought impossible. But remember, Alina, courage is not about never feeling tired. It's about standing even when you are. The bell rang for the 9th round. The fighters rose again, their legs heavy but their spirits sharp. They touched gloves once more, and this time the audience clapped at the gesture. The respect between them was clear. Marco began the round with measured movements. He no longer swung wildly. Instead, he focused, giving each punch care. Alina answered in the same way, moving with balance, striking when the chance opened. It was no longer a battle of arrogance. It was a dance of courage. Halfway through the round, Marco landed a strong punch to Alina's arm. She stumbled back a step, but before the crowd could react, she came forward again with a quick strike to his ribs. The hall erupted in cheers. Marco felt pain, but he also felt something else, pride, not in himself, but in her. He whispered between breaths, "You're stronger than I thought." Alina did not smile. She only nodded, her focus never breaking. As the round neared its end, both fighters slowed, their arms heavy, their breaths ragged. Yet neither stepped back fully. They kept moving, kept striking, kept proving that their hearts were larger than their tired bodies. The bell rang. End of the 9th round. The fighters walked back to their corners, almost dragging their feet, but the crowd stood and clapped with thunderous sound. Some had tears in their eyes. They knew they were not just watching a match. They were watching a lesson, a story about strength, respect, and the will to never give up. For Marco, it was the first time he felt smaller than the ring but greater in spirit. For Alina, it was the first time the world looked at her not with doubt but with admiration. And as the final round approached, everyone in the hall held their breath, waiting to see how this story would end. The air inside the hall grew thick with tension. The crowd stood tall, their voices rising in waves. People clapped, shouted, and stamped their feet, creating a rhythm that filled the building like thunder. They knew the end was near. Only one round remained. Marco sat in his corner, sweat dripping from his hair, his chest rising and falling heavily. His arms felt like stone, his legs unsteady. He had fought many matches before, but this one felt different. His coach bent close and said firmly, "Marco, listen. Forget pride, forget fear. This last round is about giving all that's left inside you. Show the heart of a fighter." Marco nodded slowly. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now shone with respect. Across the ring, he no longer saw someone he thought weak. He saw a warrior. Alina sat in her corner too, her body aching in every muscle. Her coach pressed her shoulder gently. "Alina, this is the last round. You've already proved more than anyone expected. But now, don't hold back. Whatever strength is left in you, use it. Fight with your heart." Alina closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her long journey, the early mornings, the pain, the doubt, the days she wanted to give up. And then she thought of this moment, the crowd calling her name, the respect in Marco's eyes, the truth that she had already won something far greater than a title. She opened her eyes, steady and calm. The bell rang for the 10th and final round. Both fighters rose, heavy but determined. They stepped to the center of the ring, and for a moment, silence filled the hall. Marco raised his glove, and Alina touched it with hers. The audience cheered loudly at the simple gesture. Respect had become the true prize of this match. Then the fight began. Marco swung first, his punches slower but filled with weight. Alina blocked, her arms trembling from fatigue, but she stayed firm. She answered with a quick jab, landing lightly on his chest. The crowd roared. The two fighters moved in circles, striking, blocking, breathing hard. Every second felt endless. The sweat on their faces shone under the lights, their steps heavy, their bodies near their limit. But neither stopped. Marco pushed forward, landing a heavy punch to Alina's side. She stumbled but did not fall. She came back with sharp strikes, her fists moving in quick rhythm. The crowd shouted louder, some clapping, others calling both names. The hall shook with energy. Inside his mind, Marco thought, this is not about beating her anymore. This is about honoring her strength. He struck again, but carefully, his movements no longer wild. He wanted the crowd to see her courage, not just his power. Inside her mind, Alina thought, this is not about proving them wrong anymore. This is about proving myself right. Her arms ached, her chest burned, but her heart carried her forward. She kept fighting, every strike showing her determination. Halfway through the round, both fighters stood face to face, exchanging blow after blow. The sound of gloves hitting echoed through the hall, the crowd standing with every movement. Neither Marco nor Alina gave in. Then, as the final seconds approached, something powerful filled the air. Both fighters, exhausted, raised their fists one last time. Marco swung with all the weight left in him. Alina blocked, then struck with the last burst of her energy. Their gloves touched, almost at the same moment, and the crowd erupted into cheers so loud it felt like the walls shook. The bell rang. The fight was over. Both fighters stepped back, breathing heavily, their arms lowering slowly. Marco leaned forward, hands on his knees, his chest rising and falling like waves. Alina stood tall, though her legs trembled beneath her. The hall filled with clapping and shouts. People were not cheering only for a winner. They were cheering for what they had seen, two fighters showing heart, courage, and respect. Marco straightened slowly and looked at Alina. He raised his glove toward her, not as a challenge but as a salute. Alina, breathing hard, raised hers too. The crowd shouted louder than ever. The announcer stepped into the ring, holding the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, "tonight we have witnessed not just a fight, but a story of true courage. The decision," he paused as the crowd held its breath, "is a draw." The hall shook with cheers. Marco turned to Alina. His voice was tired but full of sincerity. "You've changed me tonight. I came here thinking I'd teach you a lesson. But you're the one who taught me." Alina's face softened. She simply said, "Respect is the greatest victory." The two fighters stood side by side, raising their hands together. The crowd clapped endlessly, some even with tears in their eyes. This was not the ending anyone expected, but it was the one that felt right. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about courage, about respect, and about the strength found in every heart that refuses to give up. The roar of the crowd still echoed in the air as Marco and Alina stepped out of the ring. Their gloves had been taken off, their sweat-drenched clothes clung to their tired bodies, and yet both of them walked with a quiet dignity. The match was over, but its memory had already begun to live in the hearts of those who had watched. Reporters ran forward, microphones in their hands, cameras flashing. Everyone wanted to capture the faces of the two fighters who had given them a night they would never forget. Marco, still breathing hard, wiped his forehead and stood tall. But when he spoke, his voice was softer than before, humbled. "Tonight was not just a fight," he said to the reporters. "It was a lesson. I entered the ring with arrogance, but I leave with respect. Alina showed me and all of us what true strength looks like." The crowd, still standing, clapped again. Some cheered Marco's name, but many now called for Alina too. Alina, standing beside him, listened quietly. When the microphones turned to her, she smiled gently. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone or to prove I'm better. I came to show that courage belongs to anyone who chooses it. Strength is not only in the body. It's in the heart." Her words touched the audience deeply. Some people nodded, some wiped their eyes. That night, when Marco walked out of the hall, he was not the same man who had entered with a smirk. His steps were slower, thoughtful. For years he had chased easy victories, but now he understood that true greatness was not about showing others down. It was about lifting respect, even in defeat, even in a draw. Alina walked out too, greeted by her coach and a few close friends. They hugged her warmly, their faces glowing with pride. She had not only stood strong against Marco, she had earned respect from thousands. For her, that was the victory she had dreamed of. In the days that followed, the story of the fight spread quickly. Newspapers printed headlines like "The Night of Respect" and "Two Fighters, One Lesson." Pictures of Marco and Alina touching gloves filled social media, with people writing about courage, humility, and unexpected friendship. For Marco, things changed. The pride that had once pushed him to boast was replaced by a new purpose. At the gym, he no longer trained only to sharpen his fists. He began mentoring younger fighters, teaching them not just about power but about respect. A true fighter, he would tell them, isn't the one who knocks others down. It's the one who stands tall with honor. Some of his students were surprised. They had grown up hearing of Marco's arrogance, but now they saw a man transformed by one fight. Alina's life changed too. She became a symbol of perseverance. Young women came to her, inspired, saying, You showed us we can stand in the ring too. She welcomed them warmly, guiding them through training with patience and kindness. One afternoon, weeks after the fight, Marco visited Alina's gym. The place was small, the equipment simple, but the energy inside was alive. Children trained with enthusiasm, their laughter mixing with the sound of punching bags. Marco watched for a moment, then walked over to her. "You've built something good here," he said sincerely. Alina smiled. "It's not just about building fighters. It's about building courage." Marco nodded, understanding. "Maybe we can work together. I can share what I've learned and unlearned." From that day forward, they began training side by side, not as rivals but as partners. Marco's experience and Alina's resilience blended into a strong lesson for everyone who came through the doors of the gym. Together, they showed that the ring was not a place for arrogance, but for respect, discipline, and growth. Months later, when people remembered that famous night, they no longer spoke only of Marco's arrogance or Alina's courage. They spoke of the unexpected friendship that was born in the ring. They spoke of how two fighters taught a crowd, and later a whole community, that strength without respect is empty, but strength with respect can inspire generations. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Marco and Alina stood outside the gym after training. The street was quiet, the air cool, the sky painted with colors of orange and pink. Marco looked at her and said, "I used to think boxing was about proving I was better than everyone else. But now I know it's about proving that even in the toughest battles, respect wins first." Alina smiled softly. "And respect," she replied, "is the one victory that never fades." They stood there in silence for a moment, both feeling the weight of what they had lived through. The fight that had begun with arrogance had ended with understanding. And long after the final bell had rung, its echo remained not just in their hearts, but in the hearts of everyone who believed that true strength is found in respect.